What we wanted to do for this second part of the show is really pay tribute to an incredible pioneer at the New York Times, Betsy Wade. So Sree, we'll go ahead and do that. Here is a shot just of the obit, the headline. Betsy Wade, first woman to edit news at the Times, dies at 91. 45-year Times career. She also became the first woman to lead the Newspaper Guild of New York and fought a sex discrimination case against the paper. So I'll go ahead and bring on Carla and the rest of our panel, and Sree will let you go to prepare for She's on Call. So joining us will be Carla Baranauckas, Donna Cartwright, Barbara Garson, and Mary Curtis, in addition to Jan Benzel. We have a great group here for you, and we really wanted to have Carla lead this discussion, and just have people share some of their memories and offer some tributes to an incredible woman. Carla, over to you.
Thanks very much, Neil. So I wanted to just first give a quick recap of why Betsy Wade is so important, not only to journalism, but to social activism and to women's advances. She was the first woman to edit news copy for the New York Times. She started at the Times in the 1950s. And to be the first woman anything is really a difficult thing. She became the lead plaintiff in a lawsuit against the New York Times in which women sued the Times for sex discrimination. And that lawsuit led to the Times hiring many more women and providing more opportunities for women. And so this was one of the most significant things that could have happened. In addition, other newspapers looked at the Times and saw what had happened with the Times, and other newspapers also started to give women more opportunities. She was also the first woman to lead the Newspaper Guild of New York, which is the largest labor local of what is now known as the News Guild. At the time, it was called the Newspaper Guild, but this was significant in negotiating contracts with the New York Times and other news organizations in the city. And these were at times when there was a lot of labor strife. There were strikes and other things that went on. And so we'll be hearing a little bit about that. And then I just wanted to read one quote from the obituary because she was excellent at all the work that she did. And the obituary said, she was soon recognized for her cool appraisals of articles and her deft pencil, invisible to readers, but all too apparent to colleagues, as her surgical excisions and repairs saved the Times from factual errors and its writers from clumsy sentences, phrases of dubious taste, and embarrassing flaws in grammar, spelling, and syntax. So I'd like to introduce now the people we have coming in who have known her and appreciated her. We have Donna Cartwright, who was hired by Betsy Wade on the foreign desk as a copy editor, and who also worked with Betsy in the union. We have Jan Benzel, who worked with Betsy in the travel section in the later part of Betsy's career, and will be able to tell us about some significant things that Betsy did as a travel writer. We have Mary C. Curtis, who also worked with Betsy at the Times, and then additionally afterward, because Betsy was such a giving person, she worked with Betsy on a number of initiatives, including scholarships for younger people. And Betsy remained very active until just very recently in encouraging all kinds of people. And then we have Barbara Garson, who did not work at the New York Times, but she is a playwright, a journalist, and a social activist who had the pleasure of knowing Betsy as a friend. And I think Barbara might even share with us their inauspicious first meeting. But first, I wanted to go to Donna and see if you could just briefly tell us, how you met Betsy and how you got to know her.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Okay. I was hired by the New York Times as a copy editor in 1977. It was actually Betsy, who was chief of the foreign news copy desk at that time, who hired me and brought me onto the paper. I was always impressed by how graceful and tactful she was with people in a sometimes rough business.
Okay, thanks. And Jan, how about you? How did you get to know Betsy?
I first met Betsy when I first came to the Times. I arrived in 1983 from the Washington Post, where I had been working in the style department. I got to the Times. I had come to New York because I wanted to be an arts editor, a features editor, as I had been at the Post. But at the Times, you had to go through a sort of an initiation on news desks. So after having filled in for someone in travel as a replacement for someone who was on maternity leave, they sent me down into the lion's den, where on the national desk, they needed copy editors because they were going into an election year. So they were, even then, even in 1983, very, very few women, certainly of my generation, in the newsroom. I got to this copy desk, and there was a kind of legendary foul-mouthed guy in charge of the copy desk, whose mission seemed to be to make me as uncomfortable and miserable as he possibly could. Betsy was this calm, stable, extremely deft editor on the desk who had enough confidence in her person and her abilities. Of course, by now, the women's suit had happened, that she, in between stories, she would pull out her knitting. She would just calmly knit as she waited for the next story to arrive. She couldn't have been nicer to me. You know, she, without being overt about it, she just gave me a little guidance when I had a question. She she talked to some of the other editors on the desk to make sure that they took me to get some dinner. We were all working nights then. It was just, you know, she was not, she did not do this in any sort of obvious way, but it really meant the world to me. And then later, I mean, we'll talk about it later, but in the 90s, we were both in the travel section, and I had the great honor of being her editor there. And Donna was also there in those days.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
Okay, thank you. Mary, how did you get to know Betsy?
Well, it was in the mid-'80s when I came to the New York Times, and I had been the arts and entertainment editor at the Baltimore Sun, and so I had some experience, but I had to go on the copy desk in the art section to start, because they did put you, on the copy desk until I did used to fill in on weekends. But I was young and looked younger, and so there were some women, weren't very many minorities at all. And so more than once, someone would come and ask me if I was there as a part of a minority internship program and things like that. So it wasn't exactly welcoming, although, some people were very nice, and I remember everyone. And Betsy would come through in her comfy shoes. I think she was up in travel by then. And just, she noticed, she knew me. I don't know if she had known I was coming, or she noticed me looking a little bit lost. And she was just very kind to me, and she would initiate conversations. Occasionally we'd have coffee and just make me feel welcome. And she was always, when she ran through or walked through, she would always check in, see if I was okay, if folks were treating me well. And it just meant the world to me, because I was new to the city and obviously the New York Times. And as I said, we'll talk about this later, but at different points in my life, whether it was with the Scholarship Fund or Journalism and Women's Symposium, which we both were members of, and love to talk a little bit later. We're having our virtual convention this weekend, and there was a tribute last night to Betsy, and I took part in that. or just personally. You know, if I came to New York to judge the contest, and she would say, "You're not staying in a hotel," that kind of thing. So it seems like she was always that warm, welcoming voice, and that treated me beautifully, and treated me just as a great colleague, even though, of course, she was this very formidable figure.
Thank you, Mary. Barbara, tell us how you met Betsy.
Well,
I think that's an interesting story.
I became friends with Betsy by insulting her, unjustifiably. We were on remember, I'm 20 years old, something like that, in the 70s. So we were invited to speak on a panel about women in journalism. Now, I'm not really a journalist either, but, women who had something in the newspaper sometime. And it was me and Betsy and a very tough-looking war reporter. And every time I would say something, all I knew was Betsy was from the New York Times. So the radical, would say, "Of course, you at the New York Times," pointing at Betsy, meaning like, "You at the New York Times will take, 2 years to discover that the CIA helped overthrow Allende?" And then in the next sentence, I would go, "And you at the New York Times who do a labor story without ever telling what the people are earning," blah, blah, blah. There are, blah, blah, blah. So Betsy was the New York Times in that panel. And eventually I got to know her. I think the next time I saw her, I was writing up, covering the suit, the women's suit against the Times, where, of course, Betsy was the lead, not just the lead plaintiff, she was the organizer. And here I was, the person that made her the New York Times. "You at the New York Times, you at the New York Times," when she was the head of the union, which you might say was against the Union Times, the women's suit. But the truth is that Betsy, for all that she stood for justice within the New York Times, it's true, she was the New York Times. She loved the paper. She loved to make it right. She loved to do the editing. So in fact, she was the New York Times, and she was the lawsuit against the New York Times on behalf of the women, and she was behalf of the dignity and good treatment of union people. And you and I discussed it, Carla. There was she didn't, well, we'll talk about it later, but she didn't bring resentments from one of these roles to another. She just dealt with each injustice at the moment.
Yes, definitely. Hold it, I'm getting a little bit of echo here. Hang on. Can you hear me?
Yep.
That's better.
Okay. So the lawsuit, of course, is well known, and there is a wonderful book about it called "The Girls in the Balcony." And if anybody can get their hands on that book and read it, I think you'll find it very informative. Donna, you were on the foreign desk at the time that suit was going on, and at the time that whole situation drew to a close. Tell us what happened then.
Well, the suit was settled out of court. There was also a parallel suit by racial minorities, which was also settled out of court at roughly the same time. However, Betsy was widely regarded as the woman most likely to rise to a high position in the news department, to managing editor or whatever. And many people thought that was what was going to happen. But soon after the women's suit was settled, Betsy was abruptly relieved of her position as chief of the foreign news copy desk and moved to a lower ranking position on a different desk. And I was stunned. I was actually appalled. I had really enjoyed working both for Betsy and with Betsy.
And I believe that Betsy was aware when she took on the suit that that there would be some kind of a price to pay.
Yes.
She's made those comments in various speeches and commentaries that she's given before. She doesn't mention it in a bitter way, but just that she was aware that this was not going to be just some kind of lark that she could go on, that this was going to have consequences.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
right. And then when she got involved with the union, describe a little bit of what her involvement was like there.
Well, it was another situation where she was swimming against the tide. It's from this vantage point, it is not easy to remember how pervasive racism and sexism were in that environment. In the union, she also received a lot of resistance from people who were grumbling about, why are so many women in the, at the top of the slate running for office and so forth. And, she encountered that. That was, a fairly typical thing. It was really hard to overcome the ambient prejudices that were both at the paper and in society more broadly.
Right. So, Jan, from what I've read and heard, one of the things that actually became a great joy for Betsy was working in the travel section. And I know from having occasionally helped out in the travel section that she was not in it for getting a free trip somewhere or for just kind of having fun. She took her work very seriously there. Could you tell us a little bit about her work there and what it was like to be her editor?
I will do that, but I just wanted first to go back to Betsy's history and the motivation, or perhaps the first motivation for her to fight for equal pay for women and equal treatment and advancement of women, was that she had always wanted to be in newspapers all the way back to her childhood. She got a job at a newspaper, the New York Herald Tribune, and Bob McFadden's terrific obit tells a little bit about this. She was fired because she was pregnant. And she would say to me when I got to know her, she said, I was fired because I was pregnant. When that happens, that sets your politics straight pretty fast. You know where you stand and you know what you need to stand up for. And that I think shaped her life in many ways. Mm-hmm. So there was that. And there's also, at some point, we should talk about Ms. and how Ms. was finally accepted.
Oh, my goodness.
The New York Times.
Well, tell us about that. Go ahead. Tell us about that.
Well, I went back and I was reading one of David Dunlap's historical pieces. And Betsy's part in getting Ms. into the paper. I mean, she's given credit for it a lot, but really she worked behind the scenes on that. Barbara, you probably know a lot about this too. Perfect.
What a good picture.
This is Betsy curating an exhibit about women for the Times that I think David Dunlap had something to do with getting involved, getting it set up too. So there was resistance to using Ms. The reason that women and Betsy and many of the rest of us thought the New York Times should adopt Ms. was because we use honorifics, we used Miss and Mrs. back then, which meant that women were identified by their marital status. Well, that didn't seem like what should be happening anymore. Women wanted to be acknowledged for their own lives' contributions. So there was a lot of pressure from outside to change, but there was some obstinacy within the paper. I think this is under Abe Rosenthal's regime. So Betsy, in her persistent way, hammered away. And one of the things Betsy always did with her very good friend, Ursula Mahoney, who was our photo editor in travel, was they would always go to the shareholders meetings. And we came up with the idea There was a feminist writer whose name I don't remember, but who had been hammering at the Times to change to accept Ms. So Betsy said, well, why don't you buy some shares of stock and go to a stockholders meeting and make this point that the Times should have a committee to make the call of whether Ms. was an accepted usage in discourse in the U.S. And rather than convene that committee, I think the board decided that yes, this is the way we should go. And Ms. was adopted not until 1986 in the style book, but it was adopted. And Gloria Steinem came to the newsroom to celebrate. Anyway, so that was another of Betsy's doings. You know, she worked with people. She didn't try to be a solo pioneer in this regard. She got everybody involved. So, sorry, that was quite the digression from what was it like to work with her and travel, but I just wanted to make sure we talked a little bit about that too. She loved travel. She had a column. She was a consumer advocate. She wrote important consumer journalism about safety, passenger safety, traveler safety. She wrote about elder hostels, traveling as a family. I mean, you name it. She was that columnist for 14 years. The editor of the section then was Nancy Newhouse, another female powerhouse at the paper. I think she's on the schedule to be a guest on a future one of these read-alongs. So to be working in travel with both Betsy and Nancy, who had done more for women and women readers, and by and readers generally, for the New York Times was really quite something. I felt very lucky to be there at that time.
And then I wanted to go to Mary and hear a little bit about Betsy's efforts to continue to uplift women and young people and really all kinds of people, even after she left the Times.
Yes, well, as I said, I've been involved in the Journalism and Women Symposium, which is a great organization of women of all ages and experience levels. And Betsy, it's interesting, you talked about her knitting, but she sewed together. She took T-shirts from all of the JAWS conferences and sewed a quilt. And every year the quilt is given to someone who has been having some problems or might need a hug, might need a quilt around them. We did the quilt ceremony yesterday, which really was a tribute to Betsy, and the quilt was given to the Boylan family, to her family to have. And she was always at these conventions or camps, we call them. They were very informal. And she would go up to the young women who were maybe their first time, their fellows there, and make them feel welcome. So she was always just very involved in that. And there's a wonderful interview that Edie Lederer, one of the first women at the AP who was a foreign correspondent, she went to Vietnam, and Linda Deutsch, the AP veteran courts reporter, did with her as a newsmaker, as someone who was a pioneer, and that's available, which is wonderful. And then I was very lucky to serve. I still am on the board, and Betsy is an emerita on the board, the Ann O'Hare McCormick Scholars, which is named after a former Times person. And it gives scholarships to women who have been accepted to, it started off at Columbia Journalism School. Now it's also the Newmark School at CUNY. It gives, because of course, if you go to these schools, you have to work and be a reporter, and they're very expensive. And every year we would get really wonderful applications from women, and we would meet and go over them and give what we could. We couldn't do full scholarships, but give scholarships. And it was a wonderful experience because she took it very seriously. She always donated quite a bit of money because sometimes we would be short. It's also the Newswomen's Club is a part of this as well, of New York, and they're a supporter. And it was great to see her encouragement. And the group, the board follows up. Susan Shira, formerly of the Times, now at Marshall, is on the board as well. And we would follow up and see the work that these women are doing and push them and advise them. And Betsy was always just a part of that. And so it was great to see her just be enthusiastic about the next generations. And it encouraged me to be a mentor to so many people coming up and an inspiration of the kind of journalism I do. The intersection of politics, culture, race, on my podcast, Having Strong Women's Voices. And so to be involved even after we left the Times and to see her and communicate with her regularly was such a gift and an honor. And there's so many generations of young journalists that we were able to help push, talented women, and to really know we're leaving the profession in great hands of so many people. And as I said, it was an honor. And because of that, we got to know each other a little bit personally. She was very kind to my son. People at the time knew him as a little boy, and she got to know him as a grown man. And she was very kind to him. It was we were having lunch, and they were talking about music. And later, she got this huge pile of vintage recordings, Lead Belly and all of these. I thought you might like this. That's just who she was. And but the scholarship was so dear to her heart, and there's one name for her. So it will be continuing, both the scholarship fund at the Journalism and Women's Symposium. She really left her mark throughout the industry in so many ways.
Thank you so much for those great.
Can I just jump in? Can I jump in just
Carla.
one more thing? I just wanted to ask Barbara quickly before we go. Barbara has
I don't want to go,
sense.
Carla. Just so you know, I'm not trying to end it. I want to make sure we read the comments that have come in. So please share what you want to do. But I want to make sure, because we've got some great comments.
Cool. I was just going to ask Barbara, one of the other aspects of Betsy is she really did enjoy life. She really enjoyed having fun. And I thought Barbara could speak a little bit to that.
I want to mention, it's not just having fun, but apparently she seemed to have time for everything. And I want to mention the trait that made that possible. You talk fun. We did boating together. She did you know that she and Jim wrote a lot of stuff about the town, the history, did research on the history, and published stuff about the history of their town of Stonington. Every once in a while, I would get something in the mail. Oh, she sent a recording of McBird, my play McBird, because it was a rarity indeed. Or she'd find something in a bookstore and send it to me. Or the boating, we did a lot of boating and stuff. And she was a real sailor. I wasn't. And you wonder, how did you have time for all these things? After all, there's the union, and there's always within a union, there's opposition within the union. So you wonder, and the reason was one trait that she had, she did not have resentments. Resentments take up time. She had a sense of justice. If something was wrong, she was going to set it right, and she would give thought to how to set it right. But there was no time spent on, well, he did, and what they did. In fact, while you mentioned that she said she knew there would be consequences for her action on the women's strike, the women's suit against the Times, she really didn't understand the resentments that people would have against her. Because she only knew the arguments. Oh, yes, you were right. Oh, yes, you were right. And it was ended at that. She didn't know that she had no understanding of the rankling when someone is insulted. In fact, I once asked her about that insult when we first met her, how I could accuse her of every wrongdoing of the New York Times for 200 years. And she didn't remember it. But if she had remembered it, she would only remember it with humor. She could do so much because she did each thing in its own time for itself. And none of that, it could only be a minute that she was in a bookstore. How she could go to the post office to mail books to me. I want to mention that I think of as sad for books, because I would send her books sometimes too that she might be interested in, usually histories of Maine and odd things, so many odd interests. Well, the last 2 years, let me say, she knew she was dying. She was not accepting books. She was only sending out books. She was clearing her shelves, and that was pretty sad. But even then, I don't think she didn't spend much time or emotional energy on the negative of dying. She just did things.
Yeah, she was a remarkable
Incredible.
person.
And you also raised the issue she might have been higher in management. I want to say she was so in love with the union and her union activities and the activities for other newspapers that were failing and unions there. I'm not sure Betsy would ever have gone into a position that took her out of the bargaining unit. Ask anybody else. I don't know. I'm not sure on that one.
Barbara, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate that. I want to just remind folks that we're doing a tribute to Betsy Wade with an incredible panel: Donna Cartwright, Jan Benzel, Barbara Garson, and Mary Curtis. And our own Carla Baranauckas has been leading this discussion. I wanted to just share some of the comments that have come in from our viewers, because they've been very profound. Lisa Napoli from Los Angeles, R.I.P. Nan Robertson's book, Girls on the Balcony, which was referenced earlier, should be required reading for all journalists. It chronicles Wade and others in the landmark sex discrimination suit against the Times. Doug Levy, I'm a proud Newspaper Guild member and former organizer, honorably withdrawn since he hasn't worked in a guild jurisdiction. Thank you for this tribute to Betsy Wade, who blazed a trail for so many women and men in journalism careers. Patricia Freudenberg, what awesome leadership skills for keeping up standards. Naomi Service, Betsy Wade was a pioneer and icon. She paved the way for all of us, journalists and readers alike. The comments go on from Miriam Berkeley, referencing Barbara's Mac Bird, Rose saying that it's an interesting conversation. And I want to bring in also the reference to other unions. My mom is watching from New York. Thank you for presenting this. She remembers seeing Betsy speak at the at 1199 SCIU meetings in New York with Dennis Rivera. Dennis Rivera was her organizer. And to your point, Barbara, my mom was a member of the union, was eventually promoted to management, but kept her union card. She stayed in the union. So that might have been possible. Not sure how the guild would have handled it, but it would have been great to see that. But I just want to make sure that folks, Rachel Coates as well, sharing how moving it was that she was the Times and she was the union. Just great comments for folks. Carla, great job with this. It really is moving.
And I just want to add, just on a one-to-one basis, sometimes I would run into her in the elevator, and if I might have a stressed out look on my face or something, she would say, just don't let them get you down. And, and then she'd be on her way. But, even those little remarks were really, something that shored me up. So I appreciated that so much.
And I want to also call out Monica. Monica is a friend of the show. She's been on the show several times in the past. Monica, we'd love to have you on again, but she wants to especially thank Jan and Carla, who passed the baton her way, and sharing again this picture that was part of the obituary. That's Monica Drake over Betsy's right shoulder in the corner, and of course with her is Rebecca Blumenstein, who's the deputy managing editor. Both of them on the masthead today, in no small part due to Betsy's work and trailblazing at the Times. So I want to just make sure we're okay with time. We have this great panel. We want to make sure that we're not holding you too long. If there is more that you'd like to share, please continue. I am not going to cut off this conversation because it's too good and people are appreciating it. But I did want to share those comments and bring in that image again.
Thanks for that, Neil. I was thinking that maybe we could just have one more round for like everybody to get one more chance to kind of add one more thing, and then we can let people go on with their Sunday. I really appreciate the time that everyone has spent to come and pay tribute to Betsy. So Donna, what anything else you'd like to add? Maybe that story about her on the strike line. Maybe Donna couldn't hear me. Donna, can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes, I can.
Maybe as a last thing, you'd like to share that story about Betsy on the picket line during the strike.
Oh yes, there's a brief strike at the Times in 1981, and it was touch and go. It was not so clear whether we were going to be able to win what we wanted. But Betsy was on the 44th Street side of the building, sat down in the street in front of a delivery truck to try to persuade the drivers not to cross our picket line. And I was on the other side of the building and I couldn't see actually what happened, but I heard later she was arrested for blocking traffic. And that was the kind of thing that didn't surprise me at all, that Betsy would do that, that she would take that kind of risk.
Okay, and Jan, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
I wanted to thank you all for giving us the chance to do this. One of the real regrettable things about the pandemic is that people aren't able to gather in person for memorial services. And having attended the Zoom memorial service for Jim Dwyer just recently, which was wonderful, but not the same as being able to be with everyone else mourning and missing and celebrating someone. I'm glad we're able to do this for Betsy. I can only imagine what an in-person memorial service for her would be like. And I also wanted to say she did so much for women, but she, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, did so much for men too. And the comments that have been coming in on both the obituary and on various Facebook feeds have been, there's been just as much chiming in by men who've worked with her and men who appreciate her and men she did kind things for as for women.
Thank you. And Mary, any wrap-up comment from you?
Yes, I just want to bring up the concept of legacy. I think it's something everyone thinks about. What do you leave in the world? What mark do you leave for your years here? And being a part of this discussion, thank you again, Carla, for bringing everyone together. Being a part of the tribute at JAWS, Journalism and Women's Symposium last night, and seeing the warmth, how everyone was just so moved. Knowing that she was involved at the end, helping the Ann O'Hare McCormick Scholars, bringing another school into the group of graduate schools that are going to be giving scholarships to women, which will be something coming up soon. The whole sense of legacy, she just, by living her life the way she did, is just an example and a model of how to leave a mark. And knowing you're affecting the world in so many ways through your interactions with people, it's just, it's very moving and profound, and it leaves a lesson for me, for all of us, as we are contemplating what we want to leave in this world.
Absolutely. And Barbara, final thoughts from you?
It's just stupid that Betsy should die. It's just ridiculous. I don't want it to happen.
Yeah, I agree. I agree 100%. Well, thank you so much. And I did want to also mention, because I think I forgot to mention earlier, that Mary C. Curtis is a columnist for Roll Call, and she also has a wonderful podcast called Equal Time with Mary C. Curtis. So I hope everybody will check out her columns and also her podcast. And thank you very much, everyone, for participating in this. You've really, I think we could spend days and days talking about how wonderful Betsy Wade was. But I think that you all gave us a nice little snapshot that we can think about. So appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Carla.
Thank you.
All right. And then I guess, Neil, do you want to wrap up?
Sure, happy to wrap things up and just remind folks that actually next week's guest on the New York Times Read Along is none other than Nancy Newhouse. So that will be a great follow-up to today's show and to the tribute to Betsy. So again, thank you to everyone for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time. Mary, Donna, Jan, Barbara, and Carla for putting this together. Jan, you mentioned the tribute to Jim Dwyer. That was incredibly moving and very touching. And we were very proud to work with the Dwyer family to put that virtual memorial together and to work with both the friends and family to share that moment. It was incredibly moving. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next week for Sree's Sunday New York Times Read Along. And we'll just end again with this shot from the obit. Betsy Wade, first woman to edit news at the Times, dies at 91. If nothing else, and there are a number of people who made this comment, there are people who weren't aware of her legacy, weren't aware of her work, and we've opened their eyes to that and shared her incredible journey with them. So thank you again for joining us.